Hello, everybody. It is Christy with the Laugh or Cry podcast, and I want to talk about something that I love, and it is ghosts and Halloween. And if you've ever been downtown, you might get like a little eerie feeling, and that's because downtown Nashville is super mega creepy haunted, which I absolutely love. And it doesn't matter, you could swing a dead cat and probably hit a ghost downtown. I'm only going to scratch the surface, but these are some great stories that I've come across or things that I've experienced myself. I'm going to start off with Printer's Alley. Now, Printer's Alley back in the 1900s, in that one little stretch of alley, you had about a dozen different print shops and publishing companies, 2 different newspapers. That was our number one moneymaker back then. Now, if you've ever been in Printer's Alley, you're going to see Skull's Rainbow Room, and it opened in 1948. Skull, you may not, if you see his picture, know who he is, but if you've ever seen the show Hee Haw, you've seen him, but you just didn't know you saw him. Hee Haw was like Saturday Night Live, but for country music. It was from the 70s to early 90s. They have guest stars show up, they would do sketches, and one of the little sketches they did was where they would pop up out of the cornfield and do these little corny jokes. One of those guys was a guy named Dave Schulman. They called him Skull as a nickname. He used to be a bat boy for our minor league team. And I've read 2 different stories. I'm not sure which is true. One was that he got hit in the head with either a ball or a bat and it cracked his skull. Then I've read other stories that he was in an auto accident and cracked his skull. Regardless, he had a cracked skull. And all the ball players called him Skull as a nickname because of that. And it just stuck. So he bought that place in the 40s. It was a gentleman's club back then. Back from Prohibition of the 40s, a lady was not seen in Printer's Alley unless she was a working lady. Everybody knew Skull. Everybody loved him. They called him the unofficial mayor of Printer's Alley. They'd see him walking his poodles up and down there. He would even sometimes dye his poodles green and red for Christmas. He would hire homeless people to come and do janitorial work for him. That's the kind of guy he was. Fast forward to 1998. Skull's in there one afternoon getting ready to open. And if you've ever seen the Hee Haw overalls, those were some overalls that were sold and you'd often see on the show Hee Haw. They had little mules and the words Hee Haw all over them. Well, he would wear those a lot. He'd also wear these crazy flamboyant jackets, just colorful, and a lot of them are actually in a case in Skull, so you can see them on display. But from what I'm understanding, he was wearing those overalls that day, and he used to keep the till for the night in his front bib pocket. Well, one of his former homeless employees and another homeless guy said they're going to rob him. So they come in right before he's about to open. They put a knife to his throat. They're like, give me the money, give me the money. Skull wouldn't give it up. Slashed him in the throat 3 times. That didn't kill him. He's hollering, help, help, help. One of the guys tells the other one, shut him up, man, shut him up. The one guy didn't want to do anything. So the one that had worked for him. So the other guy grabs a bottle of liquor off the shelf, hits him in the head, and that's what ultimately kills him. He dies at the hospital, either on the way to the hospital or at the hospital. Skull's closes soon after that. Bourbon Street gets it, starts using it for storage. Employees got to where they wouldn't go in there because they'd swear they could hear his voice. Some would say they'd see apparitions of him. 2 different bartenders in Bourbon Street, the bar right next to it, told me the same story. That they've been in Bourbon Street closing time. They know nobody else is in there. They'll hear footsteps on the 2nd floor. Several years ago, there was a woman named Michelle who was the manager. She'd only been working there a couple of weeks, so she didn't know anything about this story. Her and the bouncers closing up. She said, go upstairs, tell that guy he's got to go. I'm ready to leave. Bouncer's like, what are you talking about? I've done a sweep of this place. You and I are the only 2 here. She's like, no. I see a guy pacing back and forth on that rail on the 2nd floor. Get him out of here. I'm ready to go home. Well, the bouncer's confused. He's like, well, what's the guy look like? She's like, oh, God, he's wearing these overalls, Bouncer freaked out and took off. Now, it was closed from 98, which is when he died, till about 2015. Phil, the guy who owned Bourbon Street, had bought the building and started renovating it. And it reopened as Skull's Rainbow Room in, I think, about 2015. Absolutely beautiful bar. If you ever get a chance to go there, highly recommend it. If you're looking for your nice dinner while you're in Nashville, but you can walk in a t-shirt and shorts, this is your nice dinner place. Food, delicious. Cocktails, I have personally sampled most of them. For your benefit, I'm a giver. Music, where Bourbon Street is blues, Skulls is more jazz. And Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays at 11 o'clock, they have burlesque. So that's a nice little nod to the history of the building. Skull has been known, like I said, to haunt Skulls and also Bourbon Street. For instance, I was in there one night in Bourbon Street, and the band was playing, and in between songs, they're just kind of shooting the shit, and the house music goes on. Now, I'm on the second floor. I can see the sound booth. The dust cloth is still on it. No one is touching the sound booth. I'm seeing the two guys down on the stage. They don't click or touch anything. I run downstairs and go to the bar. And I ask them, like, hey, is there any other way to make the sound go on? They're like, no. It's either stage or the sound booth. And even the one musician on stage said to the other, well, I guess Skull didn't like that song. Supposedly, Skull hates Creedence Clearwater Revival. I've seen orbs myself, and when I take a picture, and this is not just dust, because as big as the thing showed on the picture, I would have seen it go through the lens when I took the picture, and did not. Inside Skulls itself, I've had multiple people that work there. Just about everyone that I've talked to that work there say they've experienced something. Either it's dishes flying across the room, bottles of wine falling off, things getting moved, like they'll look for something, can't find it, go back to a place that they know they'd looked before, and there was the item again. Things falling off shelves, like I said, thrown across the room. I've experienced something inside of Skull's Rainbow Room myself twice. Now, when you go to the restroom, I hear he loves to mess with the women's restroom. I was in there one afternoon after I got done with the tour. It was nighttime. I go to the restroom, as one does. And these restrooms, they're one-seater, so they only occupy one person at a time. So I'm in there, I lock the door, I'm sitting on the toilet, and I start talking to Skull. Like, oh man, I really like what they've done with the place. This is great. I hope you really like it. Da-da-da-da. Then I wash my hands, as you do, or you should do. And then I go to open the door, and it won't unlock. And at first I giggle. I'm like, ha 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 ha, you know. And this is like a little latch kind of door. So I mess with the latch again, try it again. It won't open. And this is a very easy to open door. And now, thank God I've peed, or I would have peed right there. I'm freaking out. So I try for a third time. And I can see the latch. I see that there's nothing it's hanging on. There's no reason it shouldn't open. By the time I do it a third time, it finally opens on its own. Now, I've had people in the restaurant tell me that one night they thought maybe somebody had passed out in the restroom. The door was locked, and you can only lock it from the inside. So they're thinking, man, maybe somebody's, passed out or in distress. We're going to wait about 5 more minutes, and then we're going to break in. About this time, there's a man waiting for his turn into the men's restroom. And he's standing there. The door opens on its own. No one's in the restroom. Now, there was one more time I went to the restroom there, and I'm sitting on the toilet talking to Skull again. Yeah, I really like what you've done with the place, la 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 la. And I'm a good 6, 7, 8 feet from the paper towel dispenser as I'm sitting on the toilet. And as I'm sitting there, it's one of those automatic unroll paper towel dispensers. It starts unrolling. And I'm on the toilet. There's no way I could have made it go off. And you know, ladies, you cannot get that thing to work when your hand is flying underneath it, let alone sitting 6 to 8 feet away from it. So needless to say, thank God I was on the toilet, because I would have peed a little bit more. Now, I've hear that story all the time. Some people have even claimed to see apparitions of him walking poodles in that alley, because that's what he always used to do. So there's 2 bars right there that are super haunted right next to each other. They have both been, we'll say, risque bars back in their day. Anything from being just speakeasies, because Skulls used to be a speakeasy back in the day. Being speakeasies to being brothels, a little bit of everything. In Skulls Rainbow Room, that building is called Southern Turf, and it was built in 1895. And if you look at it from 4th Avenue, not in Printer's Alley, but 4th Avenue, it is probably one of the most beautiful buildings downtown. It's got that little turret on it. I think they call it Southern Gothic architecture. I may be wrong on what kind of architecture, but it's beautiful nonetheless. And back in the day, the first floor, when you walk in on 4th, that was your drinking saloon. 2nd level, that was your gambling hall. Top level, that was your brothel. It was your one-stop shopping. It was like the Walmart of its day, all right? There was a guy that worked there. His name was Ice Johnson. And he actually lived in the bar. He was the manager, lived there. I mean, loved the bar. Lived there up until Prohibition happened. Now, when Prohibition came, all the bars had to close. Now, he was devastated because not only is he losing a job, he's losing a place to live. He's so distraught, he ends up taking a gun and taking his own life there in the bar. Now, I've had people tell me that work there, because some of that had turned into law offices. And she said this one lawyer's office in particular, the lawyer will go in the morning, knows nobody's been there the night before, no cleaning crew, nothing. Drawers will be open, papers will be strewn. So that one building, haunted by Skull and Ice. Or as I call it, Sons of Anarchy. Moving on. As you're going toward closer to Broadway, you're going to run into the Ryman Auditorium. Absolutely breathtaking building as well. Now, the A-frame part, that's the original building that was built as a church. And the square part is what was built in the 90s. That's going to be like your gift shop, your concession stand, restrooms, box office, you name it. Well, there's a little statue out front of Captain Thomas Ryman. He was no steamboat captain. Made a lot of money on his boats with drinking and gambling. Well, tent revivals with religious people, they're popping up all over the place in the South. And what are the preachers preaching about? The evils of drinking and gambling. Well, that ticked him off because that's how he made his money. He would show up at these tent revivals, stand in the back, and he'd heckle the preacher. One day he decided, you know what, I'm going to listen. I'm going to see what he's got to say. Found the Lord, donated money for them to build that church, and when he died, they renamed it the Ryman Auditorium. Now, he may or may not be haunting that place, but I know of at least 2 ghosts that haunt it. One being what they call a man in gray. Now, the 2nd floor, the balcony, they call that the Confederate area. I forget what the actual name is, the Confederate balcony, I guess. And what happened is that was built to allow the Confederate soldiers, they could sit up there for free. I believe it was for free when they would come. So it was just like a place to honor the veterans. And sometimes there'll be people in there, getting ready for a show, or security. I've had more than one security officer tell me the same thing, that they'll look up in the balcony and they'll see like a guy in a gray suit, and they know nobody's supposed to be in there. So they'll go up the hall, go up there to tell the guy, you got to get out. Nobody will be there. One security guard told me he was working one night, and he's looking at all the cameras, and he sees a man in a gray suit. Goes down the hall, like from the balcony, sees the door open, door shut. He's going down the balcony, or going down the hallway. Cut to the next camera, where you should pick him up after that. No one's there. And he even went up to check it. Nobody was there. There's no way these cameras would have missed this person. He's been known to haunt that place a lot. There's been several people that have seen the man in gray. Now, also, Hank Sr. has been known to haunt that. There's a little alleyway that separates some of the bars from the Ryman. And there's an old saying that it's 17 steps from the Ryman to Tootsie's, and then 34 steps back. So back in the day, you couldn't drink in the Ryman. But if you go through that alley, you're on the second level at Tootsie's. That kind of became the unofficial green room of the Grand Ole Opry. Country stars would hang out there, have a couple of drinks, then they'd sneak in the back door. Now, the back door is the little artist entrance. Some would end up getting a little bit too drunk. Hank Sr. Hank would sometimes show up so drunk to the Opry he couldn't even perform. Can you imagine that? So drunk you can't perform. I think we've all dated that guy, ladies. Now, it's been said that he haunts the Ryman as well as Tootsie's. I've heard bartenders tell me that bar stools will get moved, that if you put a pack of cigarettes in front of this one stool, sometimes they'll end up being moved, even maybe put underneath the stool. People have seen and heard Hank inside the Ryman. So, Whispering Bill Anderson, I believe it was, he was in the Ryman. They were doing a sound check. So it's afternoon, nobody's there except for musicians or people that are working there. And he starts playing a couple of notes of a Hank Sr. song. All the lights in the building went out. And there was no reasoning for it. I mean, everybody that works there is like that. That should not have happened. So he is haunted by them quite a bit, as is the man in gray. Now, if you've seen a lot of the movies, like Coal Miner's Daughter, there's a lot of history in between Ryman and Tootsie's. So when Duke gets all excited because Loretta's playing the Opry for the first time, and instead of listening to her play live, he runs through the alley into a bar to listen to her on the radio. Because that was a big, big deal to be on the radio back then. When you saw it in the movie, that's where it happened in the movie, and that's where it happened in real life. And also, if you've ever seen Walk the Line, Johnny Cash, torn up drunk, and he knocks out all the footlights to the stage. In real life, that was at the Ryman. Like a week before, he had been in Alabama, I think it was, and had been arrested for being drunk and picking flowers. I think we've all been there. So again, drinking and drugs, a lot of history. And those are two men, Hank and Johnny, that have been banned from the Ryman, from the being members of the Grand Ole Opry, as well as two other ladies that I know of. Now, in that alley, there's also Layla's Bluegrass Inn. Now, that has been a bar for 25, 30 years now. But back in the day, it wasn't so much like that. In the 70s, you might have had one or two bars there, Tootsie's. That was about it. Broadway was nothing but furniture shops and peep shows. And where Layla's is today, that was one of those adult bookstores. And if you were on the second floor, that was also a peep show. So, but back in the day, so Civil War area, that was also a brothel. I've had people tell me stories that work there. Just, again, just like with Skulls, just about everyone there has a story. There was a guy who was working, he was cleaning up the second floor, just waiting for the downstairs to close. So he'd push some chairs together to make a makeshift cot, and just laid there to close his eyes, just to rest, to wait for everybody downstairs to get finished. As his eyes are closed, he feels this gust of wind go by him, as if somebody had walked by him. And then he felt someone leaning over him and say, "What are you doing?" He opens his eyes. No one is there on that second floor at all. They used to have a bartender named Jason. And I don't feel bad at all for Jason, because he was kind of a pill. But they think it's one of the prostitutes when it was a brothel. She didn't like him. And there's stories that she would throw shot glasses at him, and amongst other things. Bartenders there have told me stories of boxes falling. Like when they put the chairs up on the bar, there were about 4 or 5 of them, the bartenders and, the people that are working there, just hanging out. They witness, all 4 or 5 of them witness, one of the bar stools fly across the room. So, just right there in that one little area, Ryman, Tootsie's, and Layla's super haunted. And I'm sure if they are, a lot of the other bars as well. Now, across the street from Tootsie's and Layla's, that row of bars, I know that down underneath them was a chain of tunnels that connected all the bars together. And that quite possibly could have been part of the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. Now, speaking of Civil War, going back to Printer's Alley, there is a bar called Whiskey Shots. And right down from it is this red door. I believe it's part of that bar. That used to be Boots Randolph's old theater. And you may not have heard of Boots Randolph, but if you've ever seen the Benny Hill Show, that theme song, Yakety Sax, that was Boots Randolph. Well, underneath it used to be a tunnel went all the way out to the river. So during Prohibition, when the boats would come up on the river with the illegal hooch, instead of having it out in the broad daylight, they'd run it underneath the street to not be detected by the cops. That, they say, was part of the Underground Railroad as well. And Smoky Row is what they called Church Street, and that whole area, like 2 blocks wide from 4th all the way down to the river. Every single building up and down that street during the Civil War was a house of ill repute. Nashville was the first city to have legal prostitution. Take that, Reno. So what happened is they tried to get rid of them. They gathered up about 100, 150 girls, put them on this steamship, and said, you got to get out of here. So the poor captain, he would go to every port. No port would accept them. They're out for 30 days. He ends up bringing them back. He's like, look, I can't do anything with them. They have wrecked my boat. No port's going to take them. So they decided, well, you know what? We can't get rid of you. We're going to make it legal. You've got to get a license, which I think at the time was 50 cents. And every month you had to go and get checked out by the doctor. So I'm certain most of downtown in itself super haunted because of the brothels. And also the Battle of Nashville came through there. So a lot of Civil War action going on as well. Now, Union Station, if you go down the road a little bit, this is a gorgeous hotel. It used to be a train station. And right down the road from it, they call it one of the most deadly train wrecks in American history. So, on the morning of July 9th, 1918, this was just a normal, regular day, and these 2 trains are traveling in opposite directions on a single track. And they ended up colliding head-on, causing both cars to derail, and it killed 101 passengers. It was a wreck on the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway, and it, like I said, is considered the most deadly rail disaster in American history. There's a plaque that's put up to commemorate it. It's called Dutchman's Curve, is where that happened. And it's really sad because a lot of the people whom died were African American laborers that were traveling to Nashville to work in a gunpowder plant. And it was the number 4 left Nashville for Memphis, while the number 1 was a half an hour behind schedule and was headed from Memphis to Nashville. And just due to a miscommunication between the conductor and the tower operators, they ended up colliding at Dutchman's Curve at the same time. So at 7:20 a.m. they collide at a speed of around 60 miles an hour. And if you can only imagine, the passenger cars were wooden at the time. They were destroyed, killing 101 people and injuring 171. So that kind of prompted railroad companies to eventually stop using wooden passenger cars. Well, the Marriott ended up buying the Union Station and turning it into a hotel. Before that, gosh, I remember for years. They'd taken the stained glass ceiling off, put that in the baggage building. So it was basically just a litter box for pigeons. I mean, if you drove by there, you just saw pigeons all along the walls of it. It was pretty disgusting. But luckily now it is a fantastically beautiful, beautiful hotel. I have heard, now if you see at the very top of the clock tower, there is a statue, I believe it is of Mercury, the messenger god. A lot of Greek mythology here in Nashville, hence we're called the Athens of the South. There's heard tell of the sound of phantom footsteps going up that clock tower. Now, supposedly, there was a young woman, and as the story goes, she'd come to the Union Station to say goodbye to her love, who was headed off to fight in World War II. Now, when the war was over, she was so excited to return and meet him, just to find out that he'd been killed overseas. Now, she was devastated, so much so that she threw herself onto the tracks in the path of an oncoming train. To this day, supposedly, she's been seen walking the halls, still, I guess, looking for her love and waiting to step off that train. It's believed maybe she or some woman in white is taking residence in room 711 because it supposedly has a really great view of the train tracks. Guests have said they've heard sounds of dragging and other strange noises from coming inside the room, and that the room's phone will ring with no one on the other line. Unexplained shadows appear in the mirror's reflection. It's just an all-around kind of creepy little building. But it's not the only hotel that's got some haunts. Because if you go up to, I think it's 6th Avenue, 6th Avenue, the Hermitage Hotel is there. And it, I believe, was our very first 5-star hotel. You've had, suffrage movements had their offices there for a while. Minnesota Fats, the famous pool player, he used to live there. A lot of presidents have stayed there. Now, it opened in 1910. And there's a room, 910, which no longer exists, because supposedly they knocked down the wall between it and 912 just to make 912 a larger suite. And supposedly a baby tragically died in that room years and years ago, and his spirit has remained there ever since. People can hear crying coming from the empty room, and a motherly apparition has been spotted trying to comfort a baby. A woman dressed in all white, as they always seem to be. They're either a woman in blue, woman in gray, woman in white. But this happens to be a young woman dressed in white, has seen roam in the hallways. And on the first floor, they say they see a Victorian woman who's been known to wander from room to room. She'll open doors, knock drinks off the bar, supposedly even make the hotel elevators mess up. Some people have been reported to have seen an apparition of a frail young girl appearing on the hotel balcony at night. Some say they'll see a large mirror in the lobby have a crack on it with no apparent cause, and as soon as they go to tell staff, go back, the crack mysteriously has disappeared. Chairs will be moved around, doors opening and closing on their own. Even wine bottles are said to get tipped over. Now, if you go down the road from that hotel, you can run into our state capitol. And when that capitol was built, let me tell you, there was a guy named William Strickland and Samuel Morgan. And they worked on building the capitol. And they would get in some knockdown, drag-out fights because they could never agree on how it should be built. So when they died, they were actually interred in the walls of the building. William Strickland is in the northeast wall, and Samuel Morgan, who was planned on being buried in the southeastern corner. They argued so much that people still will hear the sounds of people fussing and fighting and cussing. Security guards will go to where they think they're supposed to be hearing that sound, and nobody will be there. There's an image that people will see on the grave of U.S. President James K. Polk and his wife Sarah. A man dressed in a dark suit has been seen kneeling in front of their tomb, so we don't know if that's James or not. State Capitol employees have been reported seeing a woman dressed in a fancy antebellum era garb, leisurely strolling about. A lot of people think that it's the wife of Andrew Jackson. Her name's Rachel Jackson. And there's like a little, where the bell is, I forget what you call that. They'll see a woman walking around in there and they think that it's her. They think a Confederate soldier also haunts the inside and the outside of that building. They say a dark, misty figure standing near the top of the staircase of the cupola, I think is what that's called. Workers sometimes felt threatened, and that, whatever it is, they felt like it didn't want them there. And one also reported being pushed and violently told, "Don't touch the furniture." Now, if you go down to 2nd Avenue, sadly, we had an explosion Christmas before last, and a gentleman, and I use that term lightly, had parked 1 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day in front of the AT&T substation on 2nd Avenue. And nobody's thinking much about it. They're like, oh, that's just probably somebody out of town visiting, not a big deal. So nobody thinks anything of it until 6 a.m. in the morning. He starts broadcasting out of the RV. If you can hear this, evacuate now, evacuate now. That's creepy enough, right? In between, it starts playing Petunia Clark's Downtown. Super mega creepy. 6:30 a.m., the RV, it explodes. You can see the fire plume go above the building. It knocked windows out blocks away. People have said they could hear it and feel it miles away. And it even knocked out cell phone service for some people from Ohio all the way down to the Mississippi. Now, what really took hold, luckily he was the only fatality. His father used to work for AT&T, but they're not sure if that had something to do with it. But they also found out that he was one of those 5G conspiracy nutbag people. So luckily he was the only fatality. He gave everybody enough time that if they were in that area to get out. And doing it Christmas morning, he knew that none of the businesses would be open yet. Now, the buildings right across from the AT&T substation, 4 of them are just devastated. You can see right into the building. And those buildings, some of them were built Civil War as early as 1940 even. Well, right down from the destruction is Dick's Last Resort. A lot of those buildings during the Civil War, they were warehouses. So when the boats would come up on the river with cotton, tobacco, grains, they put them there in the warehouses. And then on 2nd Avenue, those ended up being storefronts. So they would sell their goods and wares there. I've had people that work at Dick's and also the other bars that would be above it say that there's this one closet and they'll see a man walking right into it like as if he was going to another room. They'll look, nobody's there. I was standing outside of the restrooms one day and a man that works there came running out, freaked out. He goes, "Oh my God, it happened again. It happened again." And I'm like, "What?" He said as he was in there, he was washing his hands in the mirror and he sees like someone walk behind him to go to the stalls, but he never hears the doors open or shut. He gets done washing his hands. He looks down. He can't see any feet. And at that moment, the soap dispenser falls off the wall. And I guess startled him enough that he ran out. But he said he has seen that a lot. That somebody will walk behind him, go into the restroom, and nobody will be there. One of the managers told me one night they were locking up the place and they were going upstairs to make sure all the doors were locked, and they had to walk by this rocking chair that happened to be up there. And when they walked back by, knowing nobody else was in there, the rocking chair started rocking on its own. Supposedly, on that floor, there happened to be a man who had died up there, but he didn't die right away. There had been stacks of metal from where it had been a warehouse, and he was up there for whatever reason, and the metal shifted, fell on him. but didn't kill him right away. It took a few days for him to die. Can you imagine that? So that could be at least one of the ghosts they're said to be haunting Dick's Last Resort. And again, keep in mind, a lot of prostitution went down back then. A lot of soldiers down there, both Union and Confederate, because we had the Battle of Nashville. So if you want to hear some good stories, and this is, like I said, it's just scratching the surface of a lot of the ghost stories that go on down there, I highly recommend just give them. The architecture alone is beautiful in most of these buildings, and the food is great. And like I said, Skulls, Bourbon Street, you're not going to go wrong there. Music's fantastic. So if you're in Nashville, take some time. But if you're in there, you might not be drinking alone. Well, thank you so much for listening to Laugh or Cry. This is the Halloween edition. Have fun out there, and good luck trick-or-treating, y'all.